On the 14th of January 2016, police are called to a home in Lancashire, England, after a woman fails to show up for work.
The officers that attended could see through the window that there was a female on the floor.
This is a scene where it's fairly clear that there's been a loss of life and an incredibly violent and sustained attack.
A peaceful rural community is rocked by a devastating murder, leaving residents confused and frightened for their safety.
This is a savage, targeted attack.
There's nothing that could possibly compare with the brutal savagery of this murder. The residents were absolutely horrified. How could this possibly have happened? And would they be safe themselves? Would this person strike again?
Often people think, will the offenders come back?
Will police be able to find those responsible for such a barbaric killing of an innocent woman? Helmshaw is an affluent village in the borough of Rossendale in Lancashire. Historically known for its rich industrial heritage, it is a place of scenic beauty with a peaceful atmosphere and strong community spirit.
Helmshaw is a nice little village in the east of Lancashire. It's about 16 miles away from Manchester, 12 miles away from Burnley. Used to be a mill town, but over the years the industry's faded away. Fairly low crime, quite a bit of money there, nice cars, nice houses. Generally a nice place to live.
Helmshaw is in a lovely part of Lancashire. It's in the Rossendale Valley. It's on the moors, which can be awfully bleak, beautiful in summer, but very, very cold in winter. It's a lot of exposed rock, a lot of sheep around the area. It is a beautiful part of the country to live in.
It's an area where people congregate around the local pub. Most people know everyone. From a news perspective, it's an area where not an awful lot happens.
Well, certainly it is a place where you wouldn't expect someone to be murdered. It's not like a city centre or an urban town.
It's unusual for murders to occur in these idyllic villages. That said, they do happen, it's just that there are less people living in them.
Sadie Hartley is a 60-year-old mother living in Helmshaw. She's a respected businesswoman and valued community member.
Sadie Hartley was a 60-year-old mother of two, a very successful businesswoman, very outgoing, very adventurous woman. Her daughters would say that she never had a bad word about anybody. She didn't like confrontation. She would always talk things out. She was very much liked, a decent, hard-working woman.
Sadie worked in intensive care medicine and had devoted her life to that kind of career.
At this time, in January 2016, this was a very exciting time. Not only was she just getting ready to pack because she was going to join her family on the ski slopes of Switzerland, but she was looking forward to retirement and to spend more time with her family, particularly now that her daughter had become engaged.
Sadie has a reputation for being reliable, so concerns are raised when she does not show up for work on the 15th of January 2016.
One day she simply doesn't turn up for work, which is incredibly out of character. This is a diligent, focused, hard-working individual who's conscientious and certainly wouldn't normally let somebody down like that and not turn up for work.
Concerns were raised over Sadie when one of her co-workers contacted the police to say that she hadn't been into work that day and they were concerned for her safety, so officers were sent round to the address.
Sadie's co-worker had rang the police and said that she hadn't seen Sadie for about 24 hours. Hadn't heard from her, which was unusual, and that instigated a visit from the police to Sadie's home address.
So having received a 999 call of that type, particularly if someone says it's unusual and out of character, police would carry out what's called a safe and well check, going essentially knocking on the door, seeing if they got a response. If they didn't get a response at the door, seeing if there's any sort of signs of disturbance, forced entry, looking in windows, maybe speaking to neighbours, that type of thing.
So police visit her home. They're not necessarily expecting anything untoward. Maybe she tends a horse, maybe she's fallen over somewhere, maybe she's ill, maybe some minor things happened.
Officers conducting the wellness check peer through the windows of the property.
On this occasion, the officers that attended could see through the window that there was a female on the floor and what appeared to be blood around her.
This is a scene where it's fairly clear that there's been an incredibly violent and sustained attack.
Immediately, those officers would have looked for any signs of life. You know, the first building block of policing and investigation is preservation of life. They would have looked for that, but if they didn't see any, established there was no life, then they would have stood back and looked to preserve that as a crime scene.
My first initial assessment of that crime scene was how little blood was present. Given the injuries, I would expect to find a lot more blood patterns on the wall, etc.
On looking at Sadie, it was clear to the officers that she had multiple stab wounds that appeared to be in her torso and in her legs, and she was sort of half in and half out of the doorway.
She clearly had been dead for some time with countless knife wounds.
On seeing injuries of that type, it would straight away be obvious that the likelihood is that the officers would be looking at a murder, not something that had happened accidentally, and again, highly unlikely self-inflicted. The more injuries, the more likely the thought process is this is an attack that was sustained and potentially could have been caused by somebody known. But obviously at this time, it's impossible to say.
I was the on-call scientist, and I first received a phone call early on the Saturday morning from the crime scene manager. There was no known suspect at the time, so I got called because my area of expertise is footwear evidence. The crime scene investigators had identified what they believed to be a footwear mark deposited in blood.
The first thing the police would have to consider, confronted with this horrific murder, was who are the suspects, who has got a motive, how could this have happened? And their first thoughts were she must have opened her door because there's no sign of a break-in. But equally, there's no sign of a disturbance and no sign of anything being taken.
That scene will be what officers called held overnight. That means it's fully secured with officers making sure that nobody can get into the premises, or entrances and exits from the premises will be covered.
Police were very anxious that nothing be done to contaminate the scene, so it was sealed off. The whole house was sealed off that night with a police guard over it for the forensic team to arrive in daylight first thing the following morning.
Just at the front of the front door in the entrance hall, there was 3 blood spots. They were swabbed and fast-tracked, what we class as fast-tracked, to go straight to the DNA lab for DNA profiling.
Many people underestimate the power of footwear evidence because they think it's a popular shoe. Lots of people have those types of shoes, so it could have been any one of those shoes. But that's not strictly true, because as you wear your shoe, they begin to wear down in specific areas to a specific degree, but then also you can pick up lots of little cuts and lots of little scratches on the bottom of your shoe that make your shoe unique because they're random. And if any of those features are then reproduced in a crime scene mark, it's possible to say that that is the shoe that made that mark.
So at the very beginning of the investigation, there'll be a briefing. This will be to set out the parameters of what is known at this point. So it will be described about the finding of the body and what we already at this stage know about Sadie and her family. And it will be to give a briefing to all the officers that are going to be working on that inquiry so they understand what's happened to start with. And from there, setting out tasks to those staff for specific areas of business to go and try and build up that picture, because that's the main thing here, is to try and build up a picture to understand what's taken place.
It was evident that this was immediately a murder scene and a criminal investigation. This person is dangerous, they need to be caught.
With the investigation in full swing, police are working around the clock to find evidence and identify those responsible for her murder. Authorities are determined to bring justice to Sadie and her family. On a cold January morning in 2016, 60-year-old Sadie Hartley, a mother and respected businesswoman, is found murdered in her own home. Police have launched a full-scale investigation to find whoever is responsible for this savage killing.
So you would want to know who your victim was, the lifestyle of your victim. You'd want to know who the family are. You would deploy a family liaison team. They would work directly, essentially, to the senior investigating officer.
So Sadie lived on quite an affluent road where it was in a cul-de-sac, so only one road going in.
It's described as quite an affluent cul-de-sac, quite big, expensive houses, expensive cars, one way in, one way out. Type of street that really, unless you were living there or visiting, you wouldn't have any cause to go down.
The scene was held straight away. When crime scenes are like this found, then the important part is to do it slowly and to do it correctly, to make sure that all evidence is gathered, because at this point, it's really unclear what's taken place. To do that, you bring in a crime scene coordinator, essentially other forensic experts to try and understand that scene. That process can take a long time, which means that often the body of the individual will stay in that location potentially for up to a couple of days.
So we'll be discussing the scene, what options are available to you at the crime scene. So what forensic opportunities, what's the area like? Is it built up? Is it countryside? Is it rural?
At this point, there is no time scale for that murder, only that she's been found because police have been attended. It's not known at this time how much earlier in the day or the previous day the murder will have taken place.
There was obvious footwear marks in blood in the centre of the entrance hall.
So the first task is what type of shoe has made this mark. And we could identify it as being made by a steel toe cap work boot. We identified the pattern. We then worked out the size and we gave it a size range of between a size 9 and a size 11. So we knew that the shoe that had made these marks in blood were within that size range.
Police need to determine a motive for Sadie Hartley's murder. They speak with family, friends and colleagues to uncover any possible conflicts or tensions.
So the first rule is don't disturb the evidence and don't disturb the crime scene. You immediately seal that off. But at the same time, you have to also see what has been stolen, what has been taken. Was this person looking for something? Were they looking for expensive items? It doesn't appear that anything has gone missing. In fact, the house is largely, apart from this appalling scene in the entrance, completely undisturbed. This was somebody that was determined to take somebody's life. It was an extremely violent and unusual incident.
First call was obviously to Sadie Hartley's partner, Ian Johnson, who was at that time in Switzerland expecting Sadie to join him. And you can imagine the call to say, your partner is not just dead, but has been savagely murdered. But he was able to provide them with two pieces of evidence straight away. Firstly, Sadie had been worried because there had been a burglary at the house in the previous August. And this was the first time that she'd been alone in the house since then, with Ian being away on the slopes. And secondly, that a week before, Sadie had been particularly unnerved by the fact that someone had come to the door and knocked on the door, asked her to confirm her name, and then handed her a bunch of flowers.
The information was given me from the inquiry team was somebody was believed to knocked on the door and delivered Sadie a bunch of flowers. We was looking for these flowers to see if we could reveal maybe an identity of that person.
Ian also said that Sadie had told him a lady in a baseball cap had delivered flowers to her. That had also unnerved her because, again, she was unsure whether that was anything to do with the burglary.
Who was this person she'd never seen before? She was seriously spooked by this.
Detectives turned their focus to the suspicious woman who delivered flowers to Sadie shortly before she was murdered.
This is a cul-de-sac, and so you tend to only go down into the road if you're specifically going to an address. You cannot cut through. This isn't a road that goes as a thoroughfare to anywhere else.
So as a result of the house-to-house strategy, that's where they identify the set parameters that are most important to the scene, and they set a questionnaire asking the local residents, what did they see, anything out of the ordinary? And one of the residents did say they'd seen a woman that they didn't consider unusual at the time, but it's a line of inquiry that you don't ignore.
The officers that were looking into the CCTV recovery, when they recovered some of the footage from the road that Sadie lived on, they noticed a Renault Clio going up and down the cul-de-sac. This seemed unusual because it wasn't the kind of vehicles that would normally be going up and down the close. So that was that first moment of this is something that's unusual and a starting point.
This was a one-way street, so it wasn't getting anywhere, and a Renault Clio stuck out because it's a small, cheap, budget car, and the neighbours here were very much more top-of-the-range Porsches and 4x4s. One of the greatest breakthroughs in crime detection was the advent of CCTV, and Britain is one of the foremost places in the world which has so many CCTV cameras.
So any part of a murder investigation, there'll be a CCTV strategy to determine about how much there's going to be a footprint of CCTV recovered and over what time scale, because it isn't just the moment of the murder. And again, one of the inquiries ought to be to find out when she was last seen. That can be done through the house to house, that may be done through the CCTV, or it might be down to which member of the public or friend or family last saw the person.
Sadie's partner, Ian, provides detectives with another lead, telling them he had a relationship with a woman named Sarah Williams, a local woman in her 30s. He reveals that she became increasingly obsessed with him and jealous of Sadie.
So when Ian is spoken to further, he tells officers that he has an ex-partner, a lady by the name of Sarah Williams, who in fact he had a relationship with whilst in a relationship with Sadie. So it would appear that he has some concerns about that female. Checks would be carried out and looked into to ascertain who she is and find out a bit more about her. What officers do discover is that Sarah has in fact written a letter to Sadie, telling Sadie all about her relationship with Ian. Sarah is very, very obsessive in her behaviour, even down to the point that she's put trackers on Ian's vehicle so that she can see where he's at and what he's doing. So her obsessive behaviour would be a real concern to the investigation team.
Ian said that he'd broke the relationship off because she was clingy and was hard to manage, something that Sarah Williams later said herself. Sarah Williams had also taken the step of sending a detailed and very angry letter to Sadie's address, revealing the details of this torrid affair. This now becomes a really interesting line of inquiry for the police.
He had a relationship with Sarah Williams, broke it off, she didn't take it well. Is she involved in this homicide?
she had reacted extremely badly to being the end of their relationship. Williams had sent Sadie a particularly spiteful and vicious letter claiming still to have fantastic sex with Ian Johnson.
So in these circumstances, because it's quite a remote location, a small village, and Sarah herself lived, I think it was around 50 miles away from that location, it's quite key to know where her phone might be, and from the network providers, they're able to tell you to a reasonable certainty where a phone is if it's been moved. In this case, the phone on the night before was shown to be in the location of Sadie's village.
So police immediately start looking at this Sarah Williams individual that Ian had had this affair with, this dysfunctional on-off affair, which had clearly ended quite badly. And looking at her mobile phone data, they can place her in the area on the day that these flowers were delivered to Sadie's address. It's not an area that you'd immediately obviously go to. This isn't an area with lots and lots of different things to do. This isn't a busy city centre. What reason did this individual, who apparently has a grudge to bear, need to be in that area, particularly at the time where this bouquet of flowers was delivered by this strange individual?
So the hypothesis, and this would be my hypothesis, that she's a woman scorned from a relationship with Ian, didn't like it. She's found out where Sadie lives, and she's gone and delivered flowers to the address to make sure she's got the right address.
The police immediately had a scenario in their mind that Sarah Williams had been in Helmshaw, was involved in the delivery of flowers in what was clearly a dry run for the murder. They had to arrest this woman now. Yes, at 2:45 in the morning, the Cheshire Police smashed in the door of Sarah Williams at her home in Chester and found her in bed and arrested her on the spot.
The way that's done is to normally get a warrant for the address of the person that's going to be arrested, to take a team of officers who can do what we call rapid entry, so making sure they can get into an address really quickly. The reason for that is to make sure people don't have chance to destroy evidence, throw things out of windows, delete messages on phones. So very much a rapid entry into the premises, so they force entry through the doors, followed by some of the investigation team.
Williams is taken into custody for the murder, but questions still remain. If Sarah delivered the flowers herself, wouldn't Sadie have recognised her and told her partner Ian? Police will need more than circumstantial evidence to ascertain whether Sarah Williams murdered her ex's partner in a jealous rage. Police in Lancashire have just arrested 35-year-old Sarah Williams on suspicion of murdering 60-year-old Sadie Hartley in her home in Helmshaw on January 15, 2016. Williams, who is in a relationship with Sadie's partner, is believed to have become jealous and obsessive after he ended the relationship, raising suspicions that Williams had motive for the brutal killing.
When she's arrested, one of her rights is to have someone informed. She asks that, she describes him as a boyfriend. David is informed from the inquiry. Officers are aware that David is in a marital relationship, but equally appears to be in a relationship with Sarah. He's quite considerably older than she is, so slightly unusual relationship.
The police were to find that he paid huge amounts, hundreds and hundreds of pounds into her bank account on a regular basis. He had paid for 12 holidays a year for her and had lent her £75,000 to buy a house. This was a sugar daddy.
Detectives looked deeper into Williams's background for any criminal history.
Sarah Williams had never been arrested before. She'd never been in custody. And I was quite surprised by her coolness, her calmness. Someone who's never been in custody before, it was a bit of an anomaly, really.
In this case, there are a number of messages between her and Ian that are shown within the phone. They look within the notes of the phone and see that she's made some kind of fantasy relationship between her and Ian about how she'd like to be with him. This would be unusual behaviour. We know that the relationship had finished a couple of years earlier, but it clearly shows that she hasn't moved on from that. She's still got affections towards Ian.
On her phone, they found evidence of the number of text messages she kept sending Ian, and she'd also written little essays about him, how she'd fallen hook, line and sinker for him. He was the greatest man in the history of the world. She was head over heels in love with him, and once he had dumped her, this was almost as if her world had come to an end.
Police learned that Sadie's husband, Ian, had maintained contact with Williams in the months following their relationship ending.
So obviously a key part of the investigation is to look at the content of Sarah's phone once she's in police custody. What they find is there's lots of messages between her and Ian. It's clear that the relationship has ended. However, for some reason, Ian does keep in contact with her occasionally. It would appear maybe just to keep her on side because he's aware of her obsessive behaviour. Every now and then check in with her, which again might seem a little bit strange, but he's obviously got some sort of concerns about her and the way she is.
So in her early interview, she was talking to officers. She decided that she would talk, and she was asked to, firstly, and it's always the first question when the interview starts, is have you committed the murder? She said that she hadn't. She then described how she was at home alone at the time of the murder and denies any involvement within it.
She could have been telling the truth. And that was important because the investigation is there to gather facts and gather evidence. They're not judge and jury. They are just there to gather the facts and gather the evidence so that can be presented before a court and before a jury.
Police are very conscious that even though they have their prime suspect in custody within 24 hours of the investigation starting, and that they have some very promising evidence, albeit unproven, but they only have 3 days to create a case strong enough to charge. The clock was ticking. This was a race against time.
Once she's been arrested and her property's been secured as another scene, there'll be again another forensic strategy to look at that location, because the chances are the violent nature of the murder, the amount of blood that was involved in the attack, that any perpetrator of that attack will have blood on them and will transfer that blood to other locations. So it's really important when someone's arrested for murder that their home location is fully examined, and that will be done forensically.
Upon searching Williams's home, police uncover more incriminating evidence.
When police are searching a suspect's home, they're looking for evidence that attaches them, one, to the individual that's been murdered, and two, evidence of that they were there present at the crime scene. Within Sarah's home, what's suspicious is the complete absence of almost anything. This is a house that's been bleached top to bottom, which immediately is suspicious. However, on examination of the bathroom, on a corner of the sink away from eye view, is a small smear of blood, which immediately grabs attention. And this sample of blood is sent away for DNA testing.
Day one was the house in Helmshaw, and then we had scenes in Chester, which was the home of Sarah Williams. We had to get a team sent there to look for blood or any items in that property. They found dilute blood stains, and we used a test called luminol. Luminol is a chemical, and it's good at finding blood which has been diluted. And we sprayed that in the house of Sarah, especially in the bathroom, and we found 2 areas of dilute blood, and we swabbed that, and that had DNA inside that blood which matched the DNA of Sadie.
Whilst they're investigating, obviously the fact that 7 days earlier, some flowers delivered by a person that isn't known by Sadie. This would raise some concerns that there's potentially an accomplice working with Sarah. So officers will start to look at building that intelligence picture around Sarah to understand who her associates are and who she mixes with, to see if that links then into this unknown person that came to the address.
Police start thinking that Sarah Williams knows about the flowers and very much doesn't approve of Ian and Sadie still being together, and they start to think that someone else had delivered these flowers. Had Sarah recruited some sort of accomplice?
The second round of interviews probed her relationship with Ian. She told them that she had met Ian when she was a ski instructor at the Manchester Chill Factory, and that she was immediately smitten and they started a relationship.
So police are trawling through Sarah Williams' Facebook profile and her Facebook friends. They go through and they find an individual called Katrina Kit Walsh. Katrina Walsh is somebody that's got quite severe alopecia. She doesn't have much hair, she's largely bald, and because of this she regularly wears baseball caps and she regularly covers the top of her head.
What they also notice in her address is lots and lots of baseball caps. And obviously the person that delivered the flowers was wearing a baseball cap. So they start to consider, actually, Katrina is probably the person in the vehicle, probably the person that delivers the flowers.
So police start trawling CCTV all across the area, and this is an immensely time-consuming, painstaking operation. They find what they think is incredibly interesting, CCTV in a big Tesco superstore of Katrina Walsh and Sarah Williams together. What are they doing? They're buying a cheap bouquet of Tesco flowers.
A figure that was clearly Sarah Williams, equally a small figure in a baseball cap that definitely matched Katrina Walsh. The case was now starting to come together.
The purpose of doing a structured interview is you drip feed, if you will, the information that you have, rather than giving them everything at once. From what she'd been told in the previous three, Sarah Williams must have known that the police were getting quite a bit of significant and probably damning evidence. So her bravado was starting to ebb away, her confidence was going, her coolness, her calmness was going. She could probably feel the walls were closing in a bit.
Part of her next lot of interviews, Sarah is told that by the fact that her friend Katrina is now also in police custody, and what officers note at this point is this is the first time she shows any sort of emotion or shock or any response to their questioning. Following day, they have some forensic evidence come back, and what that forensic evidence shows is that in the collar of Sadie's jumper, there's a barb that looks like it's come from a stun gun. So this is a really significant piece of evidence to suggest what may have happened to Sadie prior to her being murdered.
In this case, we walked through and I was there with the pathologist and we noticed a piece of what we class as metal in the clothing. A couple of days later, I examined this said piece of metal which was found on the clothing of Sadie. And I can remember this moment quite distinctively. And I can remember jumping up off my seat in the lab and saying out loud, what has a point and has an electric current towards it? And I said, it must be a stun gun, a barb.
While police build their case against Sarah Williams, they continue to question Katrina Walsh, suspecting she was more involved in the murder than she's letting on.
Katrina Walsh is an unusual character and she immediately alerts suspicion, both in the evidence and the information they already know about her movements and her mobile phone and the flowers, but also everything she does when she's being questioned. One piece of evidence that comes from Katrina Walsh immediately is she says she's got such a bad memory, she always writes things down. And this immediately gets the police interested. What has she been writing down? Where is this information? What does she actually remember?
As soon as Katrina Welsh reached the police station, almost as soon as she got into the custody suite, she was immediately telling the police that she had this terrible problem with memories and all this sort of stuff. But she did know a friend, Sarah, was an intimidating figure, and she was scared of her, and she was worried what she could possibly do.
Katrina Welsh is all over the place. She is also saying things that immediately arouse suspicion. She's saying she's terrified of Sarah Williams. Sarah Williams is dangerous. She might try and kill her, but also she can't remember anything. She just knows that whenever she sees Sarah Williams, she's immediately afraid.
So as a result of Katrina being arrested, searches are conducted at her home address, and what officers find at her home address are diaries in which she is detailed in quite some finite detail, being involved in the planning of Sadie's murder, about her excitement about being involved in a murder plot, and yes, some generally quite concerning content that suggests she's fully aware of the plan to murder Sadie and is party to it.
In the diaries, she does reveal that she was asked to bury or hide something on her estate. She is a riding instructress. She has stables with horses, quite a big, large estate on the outskirts of Chester. So police immediately sent a huge team down there to see what they could find.
As a result of one of the searches, they found a Nokia under her bed. It was an additional phone. It had quite a bit of information on location and the contact or attempted contact that Sarah Williams had tried to have with Sadie at work.
Sarah Williams is suddenly probed for answers, and previously very conversational Sarah Williams has started to clam up. Suddenly, long answers that she delivers with confidence have been switched to sharp no comment.
It was now Katrina Welsh's turn to be interviewed, and she came over as a pathetic figure. She sort of collapsed on the floor, and she had to be helped up. And then out came a whole gushing account of the relationship she said she had with Williams, how she was scared and frightened and was convinced that she was capable of murder. And she told the police that Williams had given her a bag containing clothing and towels and the murder weapon, the knife, and what she described as a zapper. And what is this zapper? And she said, oh, she went to Germany in December before Christmas the previous year and bought a stun gun, which turned out to be capable of firing 500,000 volts. She was able to take the police to her farm and showed exactly where she had hidden them.
The decision made to take Katrina out from the police location and to a scene potentially for her to identify where those items that she discarded are is unusual. However, in this case, it's really key to get back the murder weapon and other items that she described that could prove crucial for the case. Officers managed to search that location and find what appears to be the murder weapon, a knife that appears to have blood stain on it.
We found boots in a river close to the farm she used to work on.
The shoes that had been recovered from the stream on the farm that they were taken to by Katrina Walsh had been damaged. Attempts had been made to destroy them. So we did a direct comparison of the remains of the logo to all the different logos that were available that produced this pattern of shoe, and we narrowed it down to just one, specific to the shoe shop Dykeman's. They then looked at the CCTV from within the shop at the same time as the till receipt, and they identified Sarah Williams at the counter buying the steel-toe cat wear boots.
Officers at this stage will still need to be forensically proven. We're quite excited by that recovery. Whilst Sarah is still in custody, the forensic evidence from the blood that was found at her home address, the report comes back around that to confirm that it is Sadie's blood. This then would be put to Sarah for her to explain how Sadie's blood is in her sink at her home address.
So the SIO had a decision to make. Was Katrina Walsh a witness or was she a suspect? And the inquiry revealed that she was actually in Elmshaw at the same time as Sarah Williams. She was now a suspect and she was arrested.
Both Sarah Williams and Katrina Walsh are charged with the murder of Sadie Hartley. However, the investigation raises questions as to whether there has been any coercion or manipulation between the two women in planning the crime. Police in Lancashire have just charged two women, Sarah Williams and Katrina Walsh, for the murder of 60-year-old Sadie Hartley, who was stabbed to death in her own home in Helmshire on the 15th of January 2016. Prosecutors face the challenge of deciphering the responsibility of the crime. While Walsh has a previous criminal history, Sarah has motive. She was in a relationship with Sadie's partner, Ian, and became jealous and obsessive when he ended the relationship.
Katrina Walsh is now presenting herself as a victim, another victim of Sarah Williams' murderous plot. She is making out that she was swept along in this tide of fury and rage in this premeditated murder plot by a psychopathic, scorned Sarah Williams. However, that's not the case. While Katrina Walsh might present as frail, significantly older than Sarah, and of course a bit of a loner, she really isn't that in practice. She is seen on CCTV happily and ably almost running along with Sarah Williams. This is somebody who's in control of her own body, her own actions, and also doesn't present as somebody that looks fearful. Diary entries and all of her actions show this is someone who is a very happy accomplice in this truly awful murder.
The police had a theory that Williams did dominate Walsh and exploited her financially. But there's no question that this was an equal partnership and that one couldn't have carried out the murder on her own. It needed the two of them together.
The trial of Sarah Williams and Katrina Walsh begins on August 17, 2016.
The difficulty is now the vast amount of work that will be involved to get this to trial is just about to start. And this is where the picture has got to be built up around exactly what's taken place. And this isn't just an incident that's took place over a few hours, this is months in the planning. The stun gun we know was bought from Germany.
And they located them in a specialist shop which sold stun guns, CS spray. The shop assistant can remember selling said stun gun to these two described people.
So research is done obviously to when they were in Germany, and this transpires to be some weeks before. So again, builds to the picture of this wasn't an impulse killing, this is something that's been planned over a period of time.
Police are now absolutely clear that these two are responsible for this innocent woman's murder. Not only that, they can see that they have plotted and planned this for well over a year. This is detailed in the diary accounts by Katrina Walsh. This is detailed by them going all the way to Germany to buy a stun gun. This is also demonstrated by them planning this reconnaissance run where they arrived at the address with this cheap bouquet of flowers in order to sort of scope the site out.
When it comes to court, both of them plead not guilty, so a trial is held. This is unfortunate for the family because this means they now have to sit through the terrible trial and hear all the details of what's took place. It doesn't give the family any kind of relief from that.
Both Williams and Walsh pleaded not guilty in court, forcing Sadie Hartley's family to endure the painful and gruesome details of her murder.
The family of Sadie Hartley have to then listen in court, not only to these two individuals lie and lie and lie about what truly happened to their beloved mum, even if you're expecting a guilty verdict or somebody is pleading guilty. When you're going there and you know that they've pleaded not guilty, it turns what's an appalling nightmare into a longer, more harrowing ordeal.
On the 17th of August, they're convicted of the offence and sentenced. At sentencing, Sarah gets 30 years with a life sentence, and Katrina also gets the life sentence with a minimum tariff of 25 years.
Despite the convictions, the sentences provide little closure for Sadie's family, who are left to cope with the lasting pain of her loss.
People use glib terms like closure. I don't think you ever get closure when somebody's been snatched away from you like that. I think that there's a sense of acceptance that the right people have been found guilty, but I don't think there's a moment where you don't think about these appalling monsters.
For families, when it comes to sentencing, the reality is no sentence, even the most maximum sentence that UK law allows, is really ever enough. You know, their loved one is gone forever. My experience of working with families, the bigger the sentence, the slightly better they feel, but the reality is really it doesn't matter, because their loved one is gone forever and nothing can ever change that. No amount of justice can change. So yes, it does give them a little bit of a sense of justice, but the reality is nothing will ever really be enough.